3, 2, 1. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Tom Mellett. I met him through Jason Horsley and his website and podcast, autoculture.com. I did an interview, and Tom and I just kind of chatted with each other about subjects we were both interested in. And on tonight's show, we've both been following kind of some of this new kind of ufology involving Peter Levenda, people like Jacques Vallee, and Tom has some goes back and has some personal contact with a number of these people. So he's going to talk about that tonight. Tom, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, William.
Hi, great. Thanks for agreeing to this interview. How do you pronounce your last name?
Well, I say Mellett. My older brother says Mellett. Okay. So Tom Mellett is what I usually accent the first syllable.
Mellett, okay. Well, I got it right, so I pronounce it both ways. And, you know, people who haven't heard your name or haven't seen your material on your interview on Jason Horsley's Autoculture podcast, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you kind of came within the circle of some of these characters, Hal Puthoff, Vallee, Levenda?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I guess I'll start at the beginning. I was born and raised in New York City, Irish Roman Catholic, growing up in the 50s, going to Catholic schools, and I went away to college in the late 60s, actually to an engineering college to study physics originally, but that didn't last, and I ended up going in the Army, and this was during the Vietnam time. This was like in the early 70s. But I was not sent to Vietnam, but rather to Germany. They assigned me into military intelligence and sent me to the language school where I learned to speak German, and then shipped me over to Munich, where I was trained as an interrogator, but I didn't interrogate anybody. I ended up editing reports of the interrogators they were interrogating, people coming from East Germany and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So
was that Marcus Wolf? Wasn't he one of your antagonists?
Who?
Do you remember the name Marcus Wolf?
No.
Oh, he was the East German head of the intelligence there. So he was the head of the Stasi? I forgot the name of it. But he was notorious. He was like a notorious kingpin of all these intelligence infiltrations into Western Germany.
Oh no, this was mainly sort of debriefing people who would get across the border. Mm-hmm. At that time. This is in the early 70s. Right. But at the time, I was always interested in the sort of I was a good Catholic boy. And I was studying physics and all that, and but then finally, after I got out of the Army, I settled in Houston, Texas, of all places, and I ended up running into this book at a bookstore called The Spear of Destiny by Trevor Ravenscroft. Mm-hmm. So I read that and got really intrigued by it. Read through the whole thing, and at the end, there was this character called Rudolf Steiner who seemed to be was presented as kind of the white magic opponent of the black magic, not Hitler and the Nazis. So I got really interested in finding out who was this guy Steiner.
Right, and the Spear of Destiny, just to interrupt, the Spear of Destiny is the Spear of Longinus, who was the Roman soldier who supposedly pierced the body of Christ. So that supposedly had, magical powers, and Anna Nerby and Hitler and these people. Some of the Spear of Destiny is rumored or reputed to be mythological or not fully nonfiction. But there is pieces of it that are true in that Spear of Destiny. I think there was a story where Hitler, it used to be in Vienna, if my memory serves me correct, and there's a story of Hitler staring at it before he came to power. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, well, this, I really, once I got into the sort of Steiner anthroposophical movement, and I ended up studying to be a Waldorf teacher, and I actually ran into the two close colleagues of Trevor Ravenscroft, who the author who gave me the skinny of it about it,
Gotcha.
saying that it was a mixture of fact and fiction, and he told them he wanted to write an occult bestseller, and so he played fast and loose with a lot of the facts. He made stuff up. So I was satisfied, that it was kind of like a fairy tale that got me awakened to the study of the occult, which was perfect for me, being such a good Catholic boy. So this is like, it was like I took to this anthroposophy like a duck to water. It was like he was answering the questions that the nuns and priests would say, well, that's a mystery,
Gotcha.
And so here I was taking in concepts like reincarnation, but in a Western way. Then I later find out that Steiner is sort of the Christianized version of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy.
Gotcha.
So I felt like in my own way, I could still sort of salvage my Catholic upbringing, because it's kind of like a frame of reference. Because in the Spear of Destiny, you have 1,000 years before the whole Parsifal myth, the Knights of the Holy Grail, and that Hitler was supposedly the reincarnation of Klingsor, the evil king in Sicily at the time of the Grail legends. So all this appealed to me, and interesting, enough that so I went off and sort of pursued this Steiner thing, and ended up teaching in Waldorf high schools, teaching math and physics, because that was my background. And that's what brought me to Los Angeles in 2003. Was I taught a couple of years at there's a Waldorf school in Northridge called Highland Hall.
Gotcha.
So that's,
Can you distill kind of the general teachings of what distinguishes a Waldorf school from maybe a public high school or middle school?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult because it's in a way it's comparable somewhat to Montessori, and what's really different is in the lower grades. But I was teaching in the high school level, which is a whole, which is just like, in many ways, like a regular high school. The real difference is in the early childhood. And Steiner's view was that the human being was not just body, soul, and spirit, and that implicit in the idea is that the young soul reincarnates to these parents, and so there's a spiritual dimension to the education, and it's like awakening the child in stages. In other words, you don't want to force the intellect on the young child. You want to have them do like rhythmic activities before they really awaken to the intellect. So it's like trying to delay the intellectual development, and then when it comes at the right time, like at puberty, then the kids will have been prepared, and they do as well as any other kids. I mean,
Gotcha.
it's got a whole lot of problems. I mean, I'm not part of the movement now, and I can I can understand the whole Waldorf critic side of it, but it was just for me it was again, well, always, how does the spiritual enter the physical, and the soul seems to be like a buffer between. So I was always interested in that question, and that was one sort of like, I guess, one part of my life, or maybe one, I don't know if it's one side of my brain or whatever, but the other one was discovering the books of Arthur Young, which I discovered I was at the University of Texas about the same time I discovered Steiner's work, and I was intrigued by the two books that I found of Arthur Young's, the Geometry of Meaning and the Reflexive Universe. And in the early 80s, I went to moved to Sacramento because there was a Rudolf Steiner College there, which did the teacher training, and I realized that Arthur Young was in Berkeley, and I said that's only like 90 miles. So I ended up calling up, tracking down his phone number, calling up and talking to him, and he invited me over to visit, and so that was that was 1981 when I met Arthur Young, and that he's the man who invented the Bell 47 helicopter, the one you see on MASH.
Right.
His whole intention to invent the helicopter, he said that was to ground what he called his theory of process that he'd been working on since the 20s. And he felt he needed something to invent, and he settled on the helicopter. Fascinating. Gave himself...
He was really a philosopher before he was an engineer or a developer, correct?
Yeah. I mean, that's the amazing thing about him is you think, well, that the helicopter was just a means to an end, which was philosophical or spiritual, even, to ground his own theory of process. And he succeeded in doing the helicopter. And then it was after that, in the late 40s, that he met and married his wife, actually his second wife, who is Ruth Forbes Payne Young. And so this is where the interesting the connections come in, because Ruth Forbes, she's a Forbes. She's actually also the great-granddaughter of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And
was it Walden Pond? Oh no, Walden. That was different. No, Emerson was different.
Thoreau.
That was Thoreau. Thanks. Sorry.
No, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Right. But now her first husband before Arthur was Lyman Payne, who was sort of an intelligence agent for the U.S. before the CIA, of course, and they had a son, Michael Payne, and when they divorced, so Michael Payne is Arthur's stepson, and then Michael Payne, of course, goes off to marry Ruth Hyde Payne, and who befriends Marina Oswald, and they become like the star witnesses of any JFK assassination conspiracy.
Right.
They right off the bat, oh yeah, Michael Payne and Ruth Hyde Payne.
Like they were handlers almost, it seemed like, or they were guiding people. Is that
I don't know, but so what was interesting in that sidelight, I used to be very much an assassination buff. I read all the books at that time, but once I got to know Arthur, and then he told me about Ruth Hyde Payne, and I got to know his son, Christopher, who was the son of Michael and Ruth Hyde Payne, and is actually was a toddler with Lee Harvey Oswald's two daughters, who were young at that time. All right, and anyway, so this sort of caught me up short, because I actually had a conversation with Ruth Hyde Payne, and after it, I felt like that she could no more be involved with the JFK assassination than my own mother. So so that got me like really sort of really doubting and questioning, well, what is it? What about all these conspiracy theories that you believe in? So anyway, so there's Arthur. Now,
when did you meet Arthur? When you met Arthur M. Young, was his wife there, Ruth Forbes Payne? Were you able to meet her as well?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you were. What part of Berkeley were they in? Do you recollect? Do you know?
Yeah, they lived near the intersection of College Avenue and Ashby.
Oh, okay.
In the real, right?
Oh, exactly where that is.
Yeah, right. And I used to go in there. I used to visit them a lot, because I was in Sacramento, and then I would come make a few trips in to visit. And yeah, I had I had great conversations with Ruth and Arthur at the dinner table when I visit them, and include that they after Arthur did the helicopter and he married Ruth, they went off to England and other places to study the psychic phenomena. This is like 1950, and I even had a conversation with Ruth where she said, we met an interesting. Had this spiritual group of people that we met in England, and one of the characters there was a guy, this kind of hack science fiction writer who was L. Ron Hubbard, saying, well, why should I write science fiction for pennies a word when I can make millions? I'm going to found a religion, and so they knew that they were. It was like they were in the New Age, 20, 30 years before there was a New Age.
Right, and that was an interesting statement that is remembered by those fellow writers that Hubbard had made that statement. It's probably post Babylon working, post Jack Parsons, but. Yeah,
and it's intriguing because this is part of what I call the provenance of TTSA, and it will get, if I can get to it later, I mean, it'll get to Crowley and Lovecraft through Levenda. But
we're getting to that. TTSA, for those who don't know, is To the Stars Academy.
Yeah, but for me, it all hinges on my connection with Arthur Young, and and Arthur, I was never interested in ufology, but I got somewhat interested because he loved the writings that Billy Meyer, the Swiss guy with the Pleiadians.
Mm-hmm.
But Arthur he didn't care about the nuts and bolts of he was more interested in the message, the things that, Billy Meyer was transcribing about the beings and, how advanced they were in the Pleiades,
Right.
So that was intriguing, and Arthur was also very strongly into astrology in his own way, and I was into astrology as well at that time. But so anyway, this goes on to, well, let's see, in the 80s, I ended up going back to Texas, where I had, actually, I'd been at the university before, and I went back with my, second wife. And I remember calling Arthur up in 1986 and saying, Arthur, I've just moved to Austin, Texas. And he said, oh, well, I just heard the other day, Hal Puthoff called me. He moved to Austin, Texas. So, I only got to know Hal Puthoff. What was funny is that Hal Puthoff has a strong connection with the Waldorf education because he and his wife, Adrienne Kennedy, they were married in the Church of Scientology in the late 60s, and they ended up with 5 kids. And they were the founders of what's now called the Peninsula Waldorf School in Palo Alto.
Right. What street is that one on?
What's that?
That was my hometown.
Where, Palo?
Yeah.
Palo Alto?
Correct.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
No, so I know all these areas. I know SRI. I know a lot of these places, Palo Alto. I used to go to SRI actually when I was younger. And I grew up around a lot of professors.
Oh, okay. So
they
you
were
were
all
there.
At Stanford. I actually had been. I'd been to. Yeah, I can tell. I mean, it's very odd, but I didn't really know the totality of it. But I knew a lot of the stuff. But that Waldorf School of the Peninsula, is that the Los Altos one?
Yes, it was. I think it moved around Los Altos, but I think now it's called the Peninsula
Country Day Little School. That one.
Yeah, and the legend though that grew around it is that they were looking for money. They needed like $25,000 to open the school. This is like in the mid '80s and early, I think 84, 85, and Hal Puthoff took the board members and he taught them associative remote viewing, and they invested in the silver futures based on their remote viewing to predict, and they they ended up making $26,000, and they opened
Wow.
a school.
Wow, fascinating.
So this is the Waldorf school that was financed into operation by remote viewing.
Wow.
and then Hal, and then so in the late 80s, I would see Hal every morning because I'd be driving my daughter Amelia to the Waldorf school to go, and Hal he'd be the driver for his kids. So we'd sort of meet as the the father chauffeurs at the school, and I never worked with him. I just knew him, like socially like that, and I knew he was doing all this research at his Institute of Advanced Studies, as he called it, and at that time I had no knowledge of the whole the connection with UFOs at that time, because I was never really that interested in UFOs, and it was only because Arthur and his stuff with Billy Meyer, but that was it. So anyway, I actually, Hal graciously sponsored a paper that I gave at the this SSE, the Society of Scientific Exploration, in 1994 in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave a paper. It was like a philosophical thing on the anthropic principle. But during the every day at lunch, we were together. I would sit, and I was sitting between Jacques Vallee and Hal Puthoff at the table across the way from Christopher Bird, and we would be talking, because Christopher Bird, the Secret Life of Plants.
No, I'm not familiar with him at all.
Oh, and he was a CIA agent, American, but fluent in Russian. He was CIA.
Interesting.
And he wrote this with Peter Tompkins, wrote this bestseller in 1973, The Secret Life of Plants.
Never knew. I didn't know that.
He became Well, he was there. So this was not.
For those who don't know, who is Jacques Vallee and why is he important to, what were the TT Stars Academy? TTSA, why is he important?
Okay, well, mainly he's in a way, he's always been an outsider figure in ufology, because he's not, his book, what is it, The Messengers of Deception? He trying to tell us, the UFOs are real, but they're deceiving us, and they're really they're conditioning us. So it's all this kind of negative stuff. It's like not, and he's a lot of people into ufology, they want the nuts and bolts. They conceive of it in a totally materialistic way.
Right.
They don't want any of this interdimensional or ultra terrestrial stuff. They just want it, they want it the nuts and bolts, and how science can, can figure it out.
Right.
But so Jacques Vallee, I think, the key is with TTSA is that it's his friendship with Hal Puthoff from '72 onward, and they stayed in close contact, and even when the remote viewing thing died out, but then sort of reincarnated in this Stargate project, and then Bob Bigelow comes along, and you have the National Institute of Discovery Science, and Hal Puthoff is like the head of the science, but you'll always see in the background, they'll make Jacques Vallee came for a visit, right? Jacques Vallee is always around in the background, and so all of this, I don't know. I think through the, and mind you, I'm talking about the history of everything before the internet, not before. Right. And then Arthur Young dies in 1995.
Right as the internet really took, got its grasp, right, or whatever. Yeah.
So in a way, whenever how I know personally Hal Puthoff and Jacques Vallee is pre-internet, because sort of 95 is sort of a good cutoff year for them to sort of birth, before the internet, before that, and then after that is, And then, so I guess this is, to fill this in, if I'm kind of going chronologically to get to the present time. And when I started with the Arthur Young Yahoo group started, right. And then I ended up sort of being a moderator of that for a while, and that had interesting things. In '99, some of the people who were involved there were Jack Sarfati.
Right. I know Jack. I've communicated with Jack. I tried to get Jack to agree to an interview, but I think I didn't know enough about quantum physics to really. He's a subject, unto himself.
Right.
Which is
one of his best friends was Michael Savage, right? The radio host. Yeah, right. Yeah, Michael Savage, right? And
Michael Weiner, whatever. Berkeley.
Yeah,
Berkeley
but his good friend in the '70s and his book agent was Ira Einhorn.
Get out. No.
Ira Einhorn.
The guy who killed it. You're right. He killed Ira Einhorn. I think he was the founder of Earth Day, right? Or
yes, he was the founder of Earth Day. And if you go, I just sent Red Pill Junkie Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science, Volume 2. That's his journal entries for the '70s. Yeah. That's where you'll find all his. If you look up Puthoff, but you'll find a good 35 references to Ira Einhorn.
Fascinating. So right, Einhorn, for people don't know, ended up killing his girlfriend and leaving her in a trunk in his closet, super creepy, and people would come to the house and there'd be a dead body in the next room.
And denying it,
and lied all the way through. Then he fled prosecution to France, right? And I think that was interesting because there's a sort of a family, in a way, connection with the the present day NXIVM cult with Keith Raniere, because it was Barbara Bronfman who put up the bail money for Ira Einhorn. Get out! Oh my God! Get out of town.
So the Bronfman money, and that's when Ira went on the lam, went to Ireland, and ended up in France, right? And now I believe Barbara's. I think the twins. The twin young Bronfman twin girls they're in the same thing of financing, Keith Raniere.
One of them just got arrested, so I don't remember. And I actually talked to Frank Parlato, who was very well acquainted with Raniere and all these guys and NXIVM.
Yeah.
So that's an interview. If you want to listen to that or somebody else, it's online. And I also have been talking to Roberta Glass, who went to many of the hearings, his bail hearing, and saw some of these people face to face. So I've been trying to follow the NXIVM story as well.
Yeah.
But I did not know that the Bronfman family got a scoundrel like Einhorn out. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, because he's like, to me, Raniere is a latter-day Ira Einhorn.
Or Hubbard or something like that.
Strange way. Or
they don't know the full details of all of his shenanigans because he's been doing it for 20 years. There's a lot of things. And one of the interesting things about the criminal complaint was that it was about trafficking or engage in sex trafficking with 14-year-olds and under. And, it's not publicly known who those people are, where they are. So it's that story is still unraveling.
Yeah. Well, back to Einhorn. Because he was not only... He was the book agent for Jacques Sarfati, and he also helped Arthur Young. He was a good friend of Arthur Young, and this is in this early mid '70s. He was Arthur's book editor for his Arthur's 2 books that I
didn't know that. So he was heavily involved. And when did he get busted? When did he get arrested for killing?
All right. Well, the murder of Holly Maddox took place in 1977.
Gotcha.
However, her body wasn't discovered until early or 79. And then that's when he was arrested. And then Barbara Bronfman puts up the money, and then he jumps bail. And what I was getting to, the reason I brought this up, is that they tracked him down in France in 1997, but it took them 4 years to extradite him before he, got to Pennsylvania in 2001.
He's still in jail, right? Or is he passed away?
Yeah,
Okay,
he's in Pennsylvania.
Gotcha.
But what I'm saying is that at the time when I was part of the Arthur Young Yahoo group that just started in 1999, one of the first discussions and arguments was Jack Sarfati arguing with Ira Einhorn, who was, this is 99, he's still in France fighting extradition.
Wow.
And then writing into Jack, and they're fighting over this young guy who is Nassim Haramein of the Resonance Project in Hawaii. I don't know if you've heard. Not familiar,
no, not at all.
Yeah, anyway, he's sort of a new age physics.
Well, Einhorn kind of was like a Leary, wasn't he? A new ager and this kind of future thinker, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So.
Oh yeah, he was
in that circle.
Yeah, he was, and so Jacques he was had a lot of interactions with Jacques Vallee, which you could read about, and but the thing is, he still, of course, he claimed that he didn't do it, that he was the CIA did it and framed him,
right.
And that's one of the things I even today, Jack Sarfati still holds that he has doubts that Ira Einhorn did it. I mean, that's kind of really, that's a real problem if you're that out of touch with reality. I mean, anyway, so.
So you were running this YouTube, right at the really beginning. This message boards were much bigger there in the 90s, right?
Yeah, Yahoo.
So you're communicating
mailing lists, or groups.
And but so other people are in there. But what was, just before we get to that, what was the Institute for the Study of Consciousness in Berkeley? That was something...
Okay. Well, that was the organization that Arthur Young founded. Okay. Actually, in the 50s, he founded it was called the Foundation for the Study of Consciousness, and then in the early 70s, it became the Institute for the Study of Consciousness in Berkeley, and that was he would invite people over to have to lecture or to have seminars. I mean, I was there in 83 when Richard C. Hoagland gave one of the first public presentations of the face on Mars.
Wow, fascinating.
And I was there in the front row holding it, because this is 83, of course, long before the internet. And he's got this giant, like a 4x5 foot poster of the face, on cardboard that I was like propping up as he was lecturing,
Did the Institute for the Study of Consciousness, did it have any affiliation with the school, or it just was located in Berkeley?
Oh, no, it had nothing to do with the school.
Okay,
although it was down the block. I remember he was a few blocks down from Fritjof Capra, who would come in. They would occasionally, and they would argue physics.
Interesting.
Because Capra was there at Berkeley. And it was just Arthur's house and
Gotcha.
The institute that he had created. But it comes out of his it was going on since the 50s, really. And this is why Arthur. There was a book out written by David Talbot. No, not David. Well, anyway,
Talbot was it the Devil's Chessboard? Right.
No, I'm talking about no, not Talbot. I think I got the name wrong. Kaiser. Anyway, there's a book out called "The Hippies Who Saved Physics."
Okay. Yes, I've heard of that. Yes.
I think it's David Kaiser. That
sounds right. I've actually been in contact with him. He didn't agree.
Yeah.
He didn't agree.
Yeah, he's at MIT.
Right.
Anyway, he writes this book about, and of course, the main hippie who saved physics is Jack Sarfati, but it's that whole crew. Yeah. Well, if you read it, you read about Arthur Young there, and it's sort of like Arthur Young is presented as kind of like the Gertrude Stein character who had this salon in Berkeley, which is true, where all these hippie physicists met in the early 70s, although they went their own way after that. But that whole crew that's in that book, you can read about Arthur in that book, and as well as Sarfati and Saul Paul Sirag.
Yeah, they're all there. All the big names of physics in the Bay Area. Yeah.
And then Jeffrey Mishlove, who's not a physicist, but of course he wrote The Roots of Consciousness, really out of his.
And Mishlove was a kind of a disciple of Jung as well, I think, if I remember.
Because,
and Mishlove is still around, I think, but he used to do a pre-internet cable show where he would interview people like Vallee and
Thinking
Sarfati.
Aloud.
Thinking Aloud, yes.
And it's back.
Oh, interesting.
It's back. Now, I got to know him, very interesting, because when he was doing his PhD in parapsychology at Berkeley, he was rooming in Arthur's house.
Oh, interesting.
At the time. That's what it.
Back in the day when he was young, probably in his 20s, right, or early 30s.
Yeah. Now, Arthur, when I got to L.A. in 2003, I had Arthur. Had been dead 8 years, but he had always told me about this guy Obadiah Harris, who took over the PRS from Manly Palmer Hall. Down here.
Get out of town, yeah. That's what PRS is, the Paranormal Research?
No, Philosophical Research.
Right. And that's in Los Feliz. That's on Los Feliz Boulevard, actually.
Yeah, Los Feliz and Griffith Park Boulevard, right if you go down the hill there. Well, when I got here in 2003, I immediately went to see Obadiah Harris because he was a good friend of Arthur Young. And indeed, there's an Arthur Young annex in the PRS library.
Get out. Oh, wow. Fascinating.
So I got to know Obadiah Harris, and also on the faculty there of Obadiah was an educator, and he transformed PRS into what he calls UPR, the University of Philosophical Research. And it's like you can get a master's in consciousness studies, distance learning. At UPR now. That's how.
And they had a very substantial library. I think that's still there. And this is
it's still there. Yeah.
Pre-internet, so they collected tons of books. I mean, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and
it's a nice piece of property too.
Yeah, and I just read about it in Jacques Vallée's in the early 70s. He was there. He and Alan Hynek and a third guy, they all went to visit Manly Palmer Hall and sort of had an hour's conversation with him at the. So that was interesting to see.
What was his main book? It was
The Secret Teachings.
Of all ages. Yeah.
Yeah, of all ages. Yeah, The Secret Teachings. And I just found out. This is weird too. I just found out yesterday. All right, I told you about Arthur's stepson Michael Payne, and Ruth Hyde Payne is connected with Lee Harvey Oswald, right?
Yes.
Well, I just found out that Manly Palmer Hall was doing hypnosis, or he was a hypnotist, and one of his clients was Sirhan Sirhan.
Wow, fascinating! Didn't know that.
In fact, this is it's really eye-opening because this happened. Of course, this is 68, but in the mid 60s, Sirhan would spend a lot of time at the PRS, and he had some health problem with his eyes, and Manly was hypnotizing him.
That is incredible information. Where did you find that?
It's in the books. It's in actually 3 of the books that have been written about the weird stuff going on about the RFK assassination.
This is still going on. That case has been resurrected.
Yeah.
And who's the attorney who took on the case? I mean, there's a couple attorneys, legitimate. Yeah. The guy who worked on the shooting of Martin Luther King is now taking up the Sirhan.
Oh yeah, case. Right. I heard about that. But what they did was and it's only like a half page in each of these books. It says that when the police that night, when they got Sirhan to Sirhan's car, and what they found in the back seat was a book on healing by Manly Palmer Hall.
Wow.
And now they didn't, and the authors were saying it seems strange that they didn't really follow this up. They didn't interview Manly Palmer Hall. Why? They think because the mayor of Los Angeles at that time was Sam Yorty. Is it Yorty? He was the mayor, and he considered Manly Palmer Hall to be his guru.
Fascinating.
Now, Mayor Yorty, after the Kennedy assassination, it's in Los Angeles,
Right,
And
Ambassador
he already,
Hotel on Wilshire.
and suddenly, for whatever reason, why did he declared Sirhan to be a communist? And the authors speculated that they wonder if it was to deflect attention away from, because he was no communist. He was more into the New Age. He was into Rosicrucianism.
Right.
And he was into Manly Palmer Hall stuff. And it's almost like they really come out and say, well, maybe, you know, Yorty did not want the investigation to hit his guru, Manly Palmer Hall. So anyway, that really,
that is remarkable.
And from my point of view, it's again a connection with Arthur Young, because the only reason I got really connected with PRS here was through Obadiah, because Arthur back in the 90s was telling me all about his friendship with Obadiah Harris. He said, if you ever get to Los Angeles, look him up. He's at the PR, which I did.
What's Obadiah Harris's background, and how did he become the head of PRS? What qualified him that? Was he
this is
Mason?
interesting. He was an educator. He was like the head of the, maybe not, he was involved in college education, university education. And he was at the University of Arizona. And after Manly died under odd, strange circumstances,
right.
I think 1990, they were looking for a successor, and they hired Obadiah to look for a successor.
Gotcha.
And they couldn't find any, and finally they just said, well, how about you?
Right.
So he was first hired to to search for a successor, and then he became the successor.
That sounds like the story told about how they found Dick Cheney to be vice president for Bush. They anointed him to go find it, and then all of a sudden he becomes it. Interesting. So
yeah, but hey, we got to get up to Levenda, because
we've taken our time. We've gotten there. We've laid a very solid foundation.
Yeah.
So we go back to you being on the message board.
Yeah.
And being a friend of Arthur Young, knowing some of the early followers, Vallee, Sarfati, all these kind of other things.
And then I noticed in 2006, I get a new subscriber comes on, and it's Peter Levenda. And I know the name, and I said, oh, he had these, something about, he was with the books on the Nazis and the occult.
Right.
And
the Sinister Forces.
Yeah, Sinister Forces. And so he, he would occasionally write in, and it was pretty low key. 2000, it was 2006. And then me and my buddy Bob Friend, who was on the Arthur board, we ended up having like a sort of palling around a three-way email with me and Bob and Peter, and it wasn't he would it was me and Bob were writing each other every day, and maybe every 2 weeks Peter would chime in.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, so because I grew up in New York City and Peter was in the Bronx and he was Catholic, so we had this kind of New York City rapport going. And he said, the reason he joined the board is he wanted to see about, because he's interested in Arthur Young and his connection, two things: his connection with the JFK assassination through Ruth Hyde Payne, but the other is the title. What's the title of the first volume of Peter's Sinister Forces trilogy? It's The Nine.
Right.
All right.
So.
Well, that goes back to the Nine, coming from the transmissions or the channeling of the Hindu Dr. Vinod, which took place at the Round Table Foundation in Maine in 1952, orchestrated by Andrea Puharich.
Gotcha.
Right? And well, I don't know if I call it, maybe it wasn't a seance, I think it was just more a channeling session. But the characters who were there, who were present, were, Arthur and Ruth Young and, Bouvier and all these, rich scions of like...
wealthy Eastern families, yeah.
Yeah, this is the Nine. And so Peter, I think, that's what why Peter came to an Arthur Young group.
Do you think that he found out about the Nine, or do you think that he got his details from your message board?
Oh, no.
Okay, so he kind of knew about it.
Remember, he came on in 2006, and I think his Sinister Forces had already come out.
Gotcha.
I mean,
so he was.
Yeah.
What kind of information did the Nine channel to the participants? Do you know what the kind of gist of their transmission was?
Well, yeah, it's that there are 9 principles of operating in the universe, and this you could actually. Well, you mentioned Esalen early on. They went after in the 70s. They were at Esalen because Phyllis, what's her name? Phyllis Schlemmer.
No,
not Schlafly. Phyllis Schlemmer. She channeled the Nine at Esalen in the 70s.
Well, it goes deeper than that, because apparently McCarthy, the guy who started Esalen or has that piece of property, says that the Nine are really the spiritual progenitors and founders of Esalen. You know, that they're providing information. And you got Leary there, you got Robert Anton Wilson giving speeches there. I think that Manson, of all people, was there a week before the Manson murders, which is pretty remarkable. That fact is true. So,
and of course, Jack Sarfati is there too. Jack Sarfati has his own rendition of being called up on the telephone when he was 13 in Brooklyn, by a mechanical robotic voice that chose him to be one of the people who would bring knowledge of the UFOs, but it turns out to be the same as the Nine.
Fascinating.
Right. So this is, and this is, so this was the title of Peter Levenda's first
book in the trilogy, right?
Trilogy of Sinister Forces is the Nine. So anyway, so I hadn't. So from 2006 to sort of like 2000, I don't know, 14 or something like that. Well, the Yahoo group sort of faded away. It was, a lot of people lost interest, and I ended up, just sort of, I was definitely an absentee moderator, but nothing was going on really until around 2011. And this is interesting sidelight. Have you heard of Foster Gamble?
No, I'm not.
The Thrive movement, the Thrive movie.
It sounds familiar. What is it?
Yeah, it was a movie that he made. Now, Foster Gamble was a very, very close friend and confidant of Arthur Young.
Gotcha.
And Foster Gamble, of course, is he is part of the Gamble of Procter and Gamble fortune.
Gotcha.
And so he had an extra kind of $7 or $8 million hanging around, and he decided to make this movie, which came out in 2011 called Thrive, right?
Gotcha.
Anyway, and it had, I don't know, it's something you could look up, but anyway, so 2011, and I was like saying, oh God, he's got he's got David Icke in it, and it's kind of and there's like a whole kind of a Thrive movement, kind of a cult that he's built up around it. But then I sort of let it all go. And really, I mean, and think of it. I think of it now. It's about for 10 years, because it wasn't until 2016, and specifically the WikiLeaks of John Podesta's emails, which is, I guess, October of 2016.
Right.
And that's where all of a sudden I realized, Peter comes out of the blue and says, well, I'm writing these books for Tom DeLonge, and he sent a photo that was taken in 2015 in Washington of him and Tom DeLonge and and John Podesta and A.J. Hartley and
yes,
the other author, and so suddenly out of the, oh my God, what is this about Peter? I would never have predicted this for Peter Levenda, but here he is. And then I find out when To the Stars comes out that the main scientist in it is Hal Puthoff.
Wow.
And I said, oh my God, this is like,
So it's all still relevant. The past is present, right?
And so suddenly, because my thing was sort of lying dormant from 2006 to 2016, like for 10 years. And then all of a sudden, Levenda, is connected with this group that's that has Hal Puthoff, and Jacques Vallée writes the introduction to Peter's book.
Peter's ghost written book, right? I think he was the ghost writer. Is he on the title of Secret Machines?
Well, no, it says Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda.
Gotcha.
Tom DeLonge couldn't, is not the right. It's all Peter Levenda.
It's all Peter Levenda, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But
I mean, I overheard Levenda saying, and maybe he stated it inadvertently, but he was paid to write it, So.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe he should.
Yeah, he was paid. Yeah, and it turns out Tom hired him in 2014. So he didn't really come on the scene, and this is what's so fascinating because I mentioned the landed gentry, or what do you call it, the super rich in America. Well, Bronfman's or Canada, but but of course you think of David Rockefeller,
right?
And what I'm getting to is one of the members of the board of TTSA is Christopher Mellon, a CIA guy, who is of course of the Mellon
banking dynasty, right? Hitchcock, what was
Mellon.
it? Which was it? Mellon Hitchcock, who had the big house where Leary was at.
He was the great LSD provider in this late 60s, right, with Timothy Leary. In fact,
in an even broader analysis, Tom, is that he was really kind of involved in culture creation through Leary and all of these other people. So you have this wealthy banking family financing. What was the name of the building? I wish I could remember. I can't remember it offhand, but the building that Leary went to.
You mean the house in Poughkeepsie?
Yes. Do you remember the name of that?
No, but that was financed by Billy Hitchcock Mellon.
Right. Millbrook Estate.
Millbrook Estate, right.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's Billy Hitchcock Mellon or Mellon Hitchcock, anyway. But now, so one of the things, the blogger Recluse of VISUP, he's all right, I should send you that. He's kind of like taken the torch of Peter's sinister forces and going his own way with it. Well, it turns out that in 2012, he calls himself Recluse, did a whole expose of the Mellon clan and their connection with the CIA and the modern Mellons, and which is true, and so that's 2012, and then 2014, Peter Levenda suddenly gets with Tom DeLonge. Well, now why is he's not going to bite the hand that feeds him, right? He's not going to write anything about the sinister forces involved with Christopher Mellon. But do you remember early this year there was a Bitcoin billionaire who died in Cancun, going to an ayahuasca retreat?
Yes, a very suspicious death, no less.
Yeah, very suspicious death.
Yeah, not reported, not covered.
Right. And this occurred, now this guy also, 2 weeks before, he had dinner with Donald Trump.
Right, yes.
About discussing, do you know the name of this guy?
No, I don't remember it offhand.
His name is Matthew Mellon.
Mellon, right. Wow.
And he is the kid brother of Christopher Mellon.
Wow. Who was on the board of TTSA.
Yeah. And what is interesting is now this is like no one has made this connection.
They haven't reported it. No, they haven't reported his death in Mexico to any connections to Delonge, Levenda, etc.
Yeah, and he is a Mellon, and this guy Recluse wrote up a whole article about it. Sort of the, redoing his Mellon series from 2012. He updated it. Wrote a fourth one for this. But this is interesting because he is applying the Sinister Forces methodology that he learned from Peter. He quotes Peter in the 2012 article, all the stuff, because Peter, in the second volume of Sinister Forces, wrote a lot about the Mellons.
Fascinating, right? I mean, that's interesting. Yeah.
So now it's all. What is now? It's like he flips around and he's in essence like shilling for Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy. With the. Luis Elizondo, the guy who quit the government over the UFO secrecy.
Right.
So,
and is it true that he wrote 2 books, or he's writing 2 books for TTSA, Levenda? One was Secret Machines.
Well, he's writing a trilogy.
Trilogy. Okay, so he's done
and
one or two.
The second one's going to come out later this year.
See. Okay.
Now, so there is Peter Levenda, and so this really got me caught up in the whole UFO thing, in the sense of I'm hanging out on the kind of the Paracast forum, and then the sort of Facebook groups for TTSA. There's a whole bunch of UFO groups, and wondering, this is like the big mystery for me. What is this connection? Now, this is where Vallee comes in, because right now it's all the nuts and bolts people. That's what the focus, like the fighter jet video or camera releases of the UFOs, or the UAPs they call them, right? Okay. That came out in the New York Times article from last December. So like this is, but lurking behind it is this occult stuff.
Right.
And that's where...
That's interesting you bring that up, because I kind of made that realization within the last 6 months or a year. Like, I never really followed UFO, but I keep seeing occultist. What the hell's Levenda doing there? What's he doing in the desert? What's he doing at the Contact in the desert? Why is this guy who is Simon, the guy who wrote the Necronomicon based upon Lovecraft, doing in the desert with a bunch of UFO people? I mean, it's remarkable.
and really, in essence, becoming the shill or the PR guy for Tom DeLonge's group, which anyway. So actually, well, this might be a good time to turn back, and because that's the thing that I've been looking up, is this occult connection, through Levenda and others. Yeah. But and I call it, the provenance of TTSA, right? This is what really blew me away, because not only Levenda, but then I see Puthoff and Vallee. They're all everybody. It's like the whole gang is here.
The whole gang is here. They really did assemble the whole cast, right? I mean, they got everything. And one of the interesting things, the TTSA, for people who don't know, To the Stars Academy has a very ambitious plans. They have like a film arm, a book arm. They want to actually do literal spacecraft development. So they have a very broad thing, and they're starting to raise money. I don't know how much
that's all Tom DeLonge. He sees himself as the Walt Disney of ufology. Wow, he is a Walt Disney character. He even says it himself.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
He is, and and I think it's so true. Like he's bringing like a Tomorrowland and a Fantasyland, updated for the millennial generation. That's. And so,
but I've seen like corporations roll out with hyper ambitious plans, like they don't do one thing well, and they've almost always to a T kind of bungled and got lost in mishmash. And I kind of feel that same way about TTSA. Is like nobody can really get a handle on the totality of what you're doing. You're just like going to cover UFOs. I mean, Secret Machines is a fiction book, right? I mean, is it nonfiction? Have you read Secret Machines?
Only parts of it. It's I loved it. I'm sort of friends with Jason Colavito, the
Yes.
arch skeptic, who
Super
because we
skeptical.
haven't even touched upon Jason Colavito is an expert on Lovecraft,
Oh, I didn't know that.
and
And so is
and of course
so is
Peter.
Peter, right?
Now Peter has also come out with his first novel, right?
I didn't know that.
Which is the Lovecraft Code.
Oh, okay. I
In
see.
the midst, that was in the mix here. He's not just doing this secret machines. He's at work on his second Lovecraft novel.
Oh,
So why did that come out? That came out between. There's another guy, author named A.J. Hartley, who has written the fiction trilogy of Secret Machines,
Right.
and Peters is the non-fiction
Okay.
trilogy, right? That's how it's presented. But in between, Peter just last year came out with the Lovecraft Code, his novel.
Right. Okay.
Anyway, and that's when I wrote to you, because he said this is he said his Secret Machines trilogy is his version of Crowley's Moonchild.
Wow. Okay. Which I've just been reading through in the last week. I've read.
Yeah.
It's very
So
hard
that's-
to read. It's not one of his easier,
Yeah.
thing. But the butterfly net and all this stuff.
But anyway, what I see, if I go through what I call the provenance of TTSA, it necessarily brings up the occult. And so here we are with who is the real figure behind the scenes, the money man, is Robert Bigelow.
Right.
Right,
Isn't that
Bigelow
the Skinwalker
Aerospace.
guy?
What?
Isn't that the guy who had all the hotels and the Skinwalker Ranch?
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
that's what I'm getting to. The Skinwalker Ranch and all the wild and crazy occult activity that's been going on there, that's cataloged. Because that was, and so you have there's this real kind of ambivalence going on, because you've got the scientists like Puthoff, and Eric Davis is an astrophysicist who works with Hal Puthoff in Austin now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eric Davis was investigating, as a physicist, investigating the sort of poltergeist phenomena and weird stuff happening at the Skinwalker Ranch in the 90s, working for Bigelow in the NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Science.
Wow. So was Eric Davis the guy who wrote Technosis? Is it the same guy?
I'm not sure. But anyway,
I'm sorry. Continue.
yeah,
Sorry.
so what happens when you sort of go back from, here's Tom DeLonge and this whole TTSA business, and Luis Elizondo is the guy who was sort of like the Pentagon whistleblower who he became a household name, at least among ufologists, when that New York Times article came out last December, right? Luis Elizondo was part of the AATIP, the Advanced Aerial Threat Assessment organization that was funded $22 million grant provided by Senator Harry Reid to Bob Bigelow.
Wow.
Right? And so now we've got the Senate, it's official. This is,
Right.
this is
Harry Reid from Nevada, right?
Yeah. Well, and where of course he's giving his money to Bigelow, who's right there in Las Vegas, right?
Right.
And Bigelow has and supposedly Bigelow has not only his aerospace company, but there's supposedly a wing of that where he keeps these secret UFO materials that have been allegedly recovered from craft and stuff. Anyway, but if you go back to Bigelow in the early 90s, well, he came along in the late 80s because he met Hal Puthoff, who in turn had been sort of shepherding the UFO group that came out of remote viewing, and which was part of the Stargate project in the Army, in the DIA, I believe, the Defense Intelligence Agency, headed up by...
you can come in. Just be quiet. Sorry, somebody just came home.
Colonel John Alexander, who was himself involved in the UFOs and the occult. And that's how the movie, he was the sort of the guy behind the movie. Remember the Men Who Stare at Goats?
Yes, yes. So Alexander, yes.
Well, that's sort of the late '80s. That's like John Alexander. That's that whole project.
Right.
The sort of the evolution of.
That was SRI too, right? Wasn't that Stanford Research Institute? I don't know.
Well, that was no. I think I think Hal left SRI in the early '80s. This was now. Hal finds his way around.
Right. Well, one of the interesting things you bring up the occult. So you've got Bigelow, Levenda, but even Vallee is not. I mean, he's a scientist, but he definitely has he calls himself a heretic among heretics. So he definitely has a much more occult outlook into the UFO phenomenon than people who believe they're actual literal flying saucers. And the interesting thing about Vallee as well is that he researched all this other occult, well, maybe para-knowledge subjects like demons, cults, cryptids, all the psychics. So he has he fit really well with Levenda, right?
Yeah, he fits in, and in many ways, I was just the other day, I would call him, well, he is quite possibly the trickster figure in ufology,
Right, interesting.
But to go back to see the whole John Alexander thing, who was also friends with Colonel Michael Aquino, and you bring up Aquino anyway, but this grew out of the demise of remote viewing, which sort of was falling apart in the early to mid '80s, and that's when Hal left SRI and went to Texas, right, and in mid '80s. But if we go back, well, all this stuff about the Men Who Stare at Goats, well, that came out of Hal Puthoff, the remote viewing. Well, go back to the early '70s. So we go back, with Ingo Swann and Hal and Russell Targ, who are literally like the Simon and Garfunkel. I mean, really of remote viewing, and they're involved. And so this is what you really need to, if you read the Red Pill Junkie's article on Jacques' talk to the Parapsychological Association that he gave a few weeks ago. And he's talking about the psychic, how he helped found the internet in essence by bringing in Ingo Swann, but he doesn't mention. Well, wait, the provenance. You got to go back. Where did the protocols for remote viewing come from? Well, they came from Hal Puthoff. Where did he get them? Well, he got them from his training in the Church of Scientology.
I had no idea. Wow.
And this was everything what he did to become clear and operating Thetan level 7. Those techniques he brought. That's where remote viewing comes from.
Fascinating. So it goes from Crowley to Hubbard, Puthoff to the
as
present.
soon as you then of course, once you get back to Hubbard, right? Then this is where you can take over because Hubbard,
Jack Parsons and Crowley,
and now you can take over for the provenance from there back.
Well, yeah.
What I can supply is from today back to where Jacques Vallée comes in is 1972, where he meets Hal at SRI, but Jacques has nothing to do with the Church of Scientology. But Hal Puthoff does. Hal Puthoff developed remote viewing out of his training as a Scientologist. So if you're going to have Jacques Vallée as a pioneer of the internet, you need to put L. Ron Hubbard even as an earlier pioneer.
A future thinker, right? Science fiction becomes reality.
Yeah, and also Ingo Swann was a level. Ingo Swann didn't meet Hal until '72. However, in the late '60s, Ingo Swann was doing Scientology in New York City. He is operating Thetan 7.
Wow.
So Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann and Pat Price right? The former police chief of Burbank, who was these guys were all Scientologists. Pat Price is one of the greatest remote viewers, right, in the early days. So, wow.
I mean, and that's what Scientology promises is extra sensory powers or something. So,
and Hal, and then they uncovered a letter that Hal wrote in the late '60s, as a physicist, praising the virtues of the e-meter and its ability, So all this comes out of Scientology, which comes out of Hubbard, which comes out of and then there's Jack Parsons, and then and from there it's
Crowley, Blavatsky. Where did Crowley get his stuff? Blavatsky, the Masons.
And so that to me is once you get past this point or to this point, I said, well, that's where Peter Levenda comes in, because he's writing, about Lovecraft, and he's writing, and if his Secret Machines trilogy is his version of Crowley's Moonchild, well,
right. Then the past isn't that far past, right? He's bringing it back up.
So can we see this whole? So that's what for me it was like this amazing revelation, because like I was just for the last from 2006 to 16, I was like, I didn't bother with any of this stuff, and it wasn't all of a sudden when Podesta, the WikiLeaks come out and all this stuff about.
Right, and there was one email in there that asked Podesta for a Thelema, so somebody used a Crowley term, talking to him as if it was kind of like they used it in the context of like a blessing. It was an unusual way to bring Thelema up, but it was fast. So I mean, there's something there. I'd need to go through the Podesta emails and type in Levenda and search and see what pops up.
But they were all, of course, you have all that crazy Pizzagate stuff, but all the stuff about UFOs is all they're all to Tom DeLonge. They're all the correspondence with Tom DeLonge and Podesta.
Fascinating.
All, and so that's what this came out, and I think they didn't, this was this put a sort of a monkey wrench in their presentation, because they weren't ready to come out with this stuff, but the Podesta emails with Tom DeLonge forced their hand. And then, this is the other thing, is that Podesta, being Hillary's campaign manager, well, obviously they were counting on Hillary becoming president.
Right.
But instead we have Trump. So Hillary,
that whole connection just died off, right? The connection between Podesta and DeLonge.
What is it that got that did not have, because, I think this is what Tom DeLonge and Levenda, they were all counting on Hillary, that if, when Hillary becomes president, then we will have this disclosure.
Wow. So even just that loss changed TTSA's future plans, those future plans.
Those WikiLeaks
communications died off. Wow.
Yeah. And so it raises that question, well, how much, I don't know how much that affected, Hillary's chances at the election, but looking at it now,
I think that those Podesta emails were a big turning point, and the right-wing Trump-supporting media made sure to hammer on that. If you looked at InfoWars and the lead-up to the election day in 2016, they mentioned the Podesta emails every 15 minutes, if not more. Spirit cooking. These were triggers. These were people.
Yeah,
like
that
Christian,
was the literal October.
That was on October Surprise, right? And Stone, there's issues. The issues of how he knew about those WikiLeaks are still at issue today. I think the independent counsel is trying to wonder whether Stone actually really knew the details of those WikiLeaks, and then and then you talk about Seth Rich and all that stuff. I mean, that's pretty incredible stuff.
And also at that time when they came out, the same day that Peter Levenda had sent that photo of him and Podesta and Tom DeLonge, and that was the day that Jason Horsley did an update on his blog and put that photo in.
That's interesting.
And that's how I really connected with Jason Horsley was again
that
because
photo interesting.
And the realization that, oh my God, and it turned out he had long back and forth with Peter Levenda like a year before that. And
yeah, I've had a few communications. I asked him some questions. He actually sent me a long, detailed email that I have here somewhere. But I've actually, yeah. I mean, he was involved in ghostwriting a book that was based upon my research called "The Most Dangerous Book in the World," that was published by Trine Day.
Wait! You say Jason Horsley?
No, Peter Levenda. I've talked to Jason Horsley all the time.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. Because that's how you and I met, right, was through the issue of the Most Dangerous Book in the World.
Okay, so we had talked about that. I don't remember that. Okay, so I think I told you that.
Were you saying that? You're saying that Peter Levenda was ghostwriting that for SK?
Absolutely. No, he ghostwrote that book. He was probably the primary writer, and his book, "The Sinister Forces," was published through Trine Day.
Yeah. So, but didn't you write, and you wrote your version of it, right? Isn't it?
I wrote my book in 2010. I think Trine Days came out, but it's I mean, I don't want to leave. I'll tell you offline. I can't remember how much we had talked about, but they excised a lot of important info.
Well, yeah, you don't have to tell me about that.
Did you read The Most Dangerous Book in the World? Did you read that?
Yes.
Okay. So do you know how they formulated all of these numerological events, like Tempe, Arizona was going to get blown up by a nuclear bomb?
Oh, right, yeah.
And all that nonsense. Well, it's a completely different ending than my book, which I just put out the 3rd edition. So if I think people would really want to know a book that has a lot less integrity towards the truth, and what I consider my book, I would suggest people read them side by side and see what happened, because the guy S.K. Bain, if you don't know this, he worked on a guy who was on the project of the New American Century, which is really the center of everything that happened under the Bush administration, was PNAC. I mean, so if people think they're getting the fact, anyway.
Yeah.
I was just a little minnow when I published my first book, so
yeah, because that was how I first got connected with you, was like through Levenda, and I remember that you were credited, or you were mentioned in the acknowledgments.
Yes, I was credited on the intro. I think they wrote something like, "This book is based upon the research of William Ramsey," but they went off into the jungle, deep into the jungle, baby, as far as I'm concerned. Because they took all the incriminating stuff I had about very well-known figures, and they just threw it in the garbage, man.
Wow. So, yeah, because that's what really intrigues me now about Peter Levenda, because it's like
why is he? Yeah, right. No, you're bringing up a good point. Is he a gunman for hire? Right.
Yeah, he's not going to go after Christopher Mellon.
Right.
Now, the way he went after the Mellons, before he met Tom DeLonge,
right.
In his Sinister Forces. I mean,
those are great questions. How did he get selected for Secret Machines, and how did he get selected for the most dangerous book ever written?
I think it was Tom DeLonge. Now, Tom DeLonge himself has, an interesting, factoid about his life, is that his mother was a very, very staunch, devout fundamentalist Christian who tried to push that on Tom.
Gotcha. So he's revolted, yeah. So.
Yeah, so he's got kind of this reaction formation going against his mother's Christianity, but he's not going to, ditch his mother. And so what I see is that he is drawn toward Levenda's non-Christian demonology.
Right.
That it's, and this is what I see is behind the whole TTSA. Well, it's this is this one, there's the Christian demonology faction in the government. I mean, it's called, what is it called? The Collins Group in England,
right,
I think. But here is Levenda, all this stuff with Lovecraft and Crowley and all this, and that's what Tom DeLonge likes, because he's able to distance himself from his mother's Christian fundamentalism, but he keeps connected with her by falling into the non-Christian demonology fundamentalism.
Right. So ufology is a kind of religion, right? I mean,
it's very, it's amazing. Yeah. The stuff about they call it the metamaterials, the alleged, all this stuff that was brought, supposedly fell off or was left by UFOs, and secret. It has mysterious properties. Well, there's just the latest video on To the Stars was Tom DeLonge and Elizondo showing them flying to Ohio to pick up material from somebody said this was from a UFO crash, and they bring it and it shows them they drive down to Austin, Texas, and they deliver it to Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis.
Crazy.
And for the testing, but the testing they don't give it out to an independent lab. They're controlling it.
Interesting.
And this stuff with this reminds me so much of medieval Christianity and the worshiping the relics of the saints.
Right. Interesting. Like you can't see it. This has
or
power.
This is the finger bone of Saint Paul, and this has this magical power.
This is
right?
a piece of the cross that Christ had,
And it's
so they had warehouses of Christ's cross in the Catholic Church.
And they had all kinds of, of course, they were fake. They were there were fake relics, and they would sell them. And
there's a business.
And the thing is, for me, having been raised Catholic, I can look back at this and say, this is not like fundamentalist Christianity, Protestant, like, or in the 19th century. This is like back before the Renaissance. This is medieval Christianity.
Right.
This is like medieval.
Even more superstition than the 19th century,
it is,
right? More faith, more superstition, more ignorance.
Yeah, with the
more
relics,
closed doors. Yeah.
And the hysteria and paranoia.
And fake deaths. The man's always watching them. All this stuff.
The blend of black. So it's like we've regressed. Even we have regressed back to like the Dark Ages in a way.
That's interesting, man. That's amazing. You have an amazing history, face to face with a lot of these people.
Yeah, and I just sort of
that's still there. That's pretty remarkable that you were in.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. When I was my one oblique connection with Keith Raniere is that we're both alumni of the same college, Rensselaer Polytech, RPI in Troy, New York. I was class of 70. He was like class of 84. So, but
you're lucky you never had to compete with him at university because he has a 220 IQ. So you would never have had a chance for the top grades.
Yeah. Well, you have to have enough smarts to get in. Right. And,
That's a good school. A really good school, yeah.
And what I was going to say, when I was in a fraternity there, and one of my nicknames was Underfoot, because I would always seem to show up at times when, either uncomfortable times or something, and I didn't, that's why I was like Forrest Gump. I just sort of, I had no intention or consciousness, but all of a sudden I was witness to this, or somebody would confide in me. So I keep, I don't know, running into
interesting people. Levenda, Puthoff. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, I think that we've done an hour and a half, so I think it's probably
all right.
That ending is probably a great point to bookend it. How can people contact you, Tom, if they have any inquiries or questions or anything?
Oh, yeah, I should. Yeah, geez, I don't have a website, but
Twitter, Facebook.
Yeah, I'm Tom Mellett on Facebook.
It's Mellett, right?
Yeah, Tom Mellett on Facebook, and I could give my email.
It's up to you. If you want to, you can.
Yeah. All right. I'm Tom Buoyed at AOL.com. That's TOMBUOYED. Buoyed up.
Buoyed, right? Gotcha. Yeah.
I tried to get Tommy Boy, but it was taken, and I ended up. This is like 20 years ago.
Gotcha.
You still have the
AOL. You're holding on to the old tech. Yeah.
I'm buoyed up on AOL.
Awesome. Tom Mellett, thank you so much.
Yeah,
what a great
Mellett.
talk. That was really fascinating.
Yeah, this is great because I've been hoping to. I got all this stuff in here to talk about, and it really helps me to sort of structure it all together because there's a definite there's a timeline here that I.
Yes. Well, I think it's fascinating too that you have this background knowledge on something that's really a cultural push. Tom DeLonge
Yeah.
got on the biggest podcast in the world, Joe Rogan, and made his pitch, which was kind of a curveball pitch, but he still put it out there, to
Yeah.
millions of people. And, it's interesting. Some people have surmised how did he get on there, how that happened, but, it's still interesting. Levenda's out there, still a cultural force, and
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's fascinating. Anyway, I'm going to stop recording right now. Let me hit this
All right.
button.
Great.